Ladies and gentlemen, the final part of the third global conference of the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network. Welcome back. I hope you had a good break. I hope you could network with people that you already know and interact with, and you took the advantage of being physically together at the same place. And I hope especially that you could also meet new people at this conference. I had yesterday evening a discussion with someone who can be qualified as a usual suspect at many internet governance processes around the world, and I asked this person, how many % of the people in the room do you actually know by first name? And this person said, just 50%. And that I found amazing, and I think this is a testimony to what this policy network has become. This is the second half now of the stakeholder plenary on the way forward. And after that, we have our closing session. I would like to start the second half and resume basically the order before the break and the great discussion that we all had. Before I give the floor to our first discussant, I also want to encourage everybody in the room, please, this is also an opportunity for you, the last opportunity of the conference, to take the floor and share your view with all the stakeholders in the room. With that, I would like to give the floor to Jan KLEIJSSEN, who's the Director of Information Society and Action Against Crime at the Council of Europe. And I want to thank the Council of Europe for its great institutional support. I want to thank Jan personally for being a member on the high-level advisory group, and highlight that the Council of Europe is both a member of the Data and Jurisdiction and the Content and Jurisdiction program. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good morning everyone. Like a number of speakers in the previous session, I also have 3 suggestions to make, so this seems to be the theme of today. One on the impact of the network that Bertrand alluded to before the break, the second on the format and the setup, and the third set of small suggestions on the substance. I would, to start, echo the remarks that were made this morning by Germany, the European Commission, by ICANN, on the need to enhance the impact of our discussions. Perhaps one or two words on my perspective. I'm of course not unbiased. My perspective is that from someone who works for an international organization devoted to human rights, rule of law and democracy, and which has a number of activities, work streams underway, which are very closely linked to what is being discussed here. So what we would very much like to see is that the discussions here in the network, benefiting from the rather unique set of people that Paul and Bertrand have been able to put together and bring together here rather, that these discussions lead to concrete proposals. We heard the word operationalize, impact, and what we would very much welcome would be if the discussions held here could lead to specific proposals into our work stream. The Budapest Convention protocol was already mentioned. We work also on terrorism in the internet, removing hate speech, fighting terrorist content on the internet, all these issues that have been raised here also in the various groups. And it is of course clear that it's a different process here. Some of the results we aim for may not be sustainable globally, but it would also be interesting to hear why that would be and what perhaps could be done differently globally, or what can be enhanced. In other words, concrete and no duplication. Secondly, on the format, I already mentioned it's a fantastic group of people here, but there are still a number of stakeholders missing. The Global South was mentioned. A number of other global actors, important countries, unfortunately, are still not yet here with us. And also some categories, I think, are missing, such as law enforcement, I think, could be stronger represented. I know it's not absent, but could be stronger represented. Parliamentarians, parliamentary staff, I think very important. And thirdly, on the substance, I already mentioned it at the opening, if we want to ensure that the internet respects standards of human rights, democracy and rule of law, we should make sure that the instruments we use to govern the internet do so as well. Hence my plea to deal also with artificial intelligence. It will be a game changer, also on the internet, also as regards jurisdictional issues on the internet, I'm convinced. And therefore, we very much hope that this network will also provide input to our work on a legal instrument on artificial intelligence in its relation, particularly to governing the internet. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those remarks. I would now like to give the floor to RINALIA Abdul Rahim, who's the Senior Vice President for Strategy and Implementation of the Internet Society, that is both a member of the Content and Domains Program. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Paul. It is a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the kind invitation. I'm greatly encouraged by the collaborative work on the operational approaches because it brings us closer to concrete support of cross-border cooperation in context of a cross-border internet. The Internet Society champions an open, globally connected, secure, and trustworthy internet. This is the internet that we believe is for everyone, and this is where our interests intersect with the INJ network. We've been observing the same trend that the INJ has observed, the increasing appetite for regulating the internet, and I'd like to step back and give a perspective about this because I think this trend will affect the work of this work significantly moving forward. The risk is that more regulatory measures may make policy coherence and legal interoperability across multiple regimes, which you know, much harder to achieve. Other than climate change, internet regulation is possibly the most pressing policy discussion of our time. Jan mentioned AI, but I believe internet and climate change, those are the pressing policy topics of our time. The Internet Society believes that internet regulation needs to be approached with extreme care. There are two reasons for this. One, the level of internet maturity, and two, the internet's complexity. It's worth remembering that the contemporary commercial internet that became accessible to most people did not even exist until the mid-1990s. The internet is relatively young. There is much that we have yet to learn and understand about the internet's potential, both the upside and the downside. And people need time to figure out how to best guide the internet's development and impact. People in this room know that the internet is incredibly complex. The concept of internet layers was essential in helping people, including technologists and policymakers, establish a mechanism of communication to understand and grapple with the complexity and interdependencies of the internet. To have a sense of an area where there is complex interdependencies across internet layers and when there is significant regulatory interest currently, have a look at the Internet Society's research work on consolidation and concentration in the internet economy. Interventions in this area really need to proceed with care. Where regulation is necessary, it must not accidentally damage other parts of the internet or permanently entrench current incumbents. There are many unknowns and variables that can lead to unintended consequences where internet regulation is concerned, and our colleague from ICANN has mentioned this earlier as well. The consequences can affect users in terms of their access and their rights. They can also affect the underlying internet infrastructure that everyone and everything depend on in a network society. And believe it or not, we are already in a network society. The INJ network needs to help leaders, policymakers, and regulators understand that where regulation is necessary, it needs to be fit for purpose. By fit, I mean fitting, informed, and targeted. Fitting in the sense that the regulation is proportionate, not excessive, and mindful of negative and unintended consequences. Informed in the sense that the regulation is based on evidence and sound information about how it will be implemented, uses technology impact assessment, and involves ongoing open dialogue and not sporadic private consultation. And finally, targeted in the sense that regulation is aimed at the appropriate layer of the internet, doesn't impact the infrastructure layer, and has gone through the process of checking where the problem is best addressed. Now, this network accepts regulation as a given, but in moving forward with this trend of increasing regulation, it is perhaps the best positioning for us to actually lead and influence. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments from, yes, please, if we can have a microphone.
Thank you very much. My name is Abdusalam Waiswa, Head Legal at the Uganda Communications Commission. Once again, I wish to thank my colleague, the previous speaker. I fully associate myself with her comments that indeed the efforts and the work of I&J is very critical. We are dealing with a subject where we don't have so many precedents. Many colleagues have been wondering, what shall we achieve at the end of the day? In my view, I&J is doing a tremendous job by bringing us all together here to discuss issues of common interest regarding a subject that is still elusive to so many people. That is a very good step for everybody. And I want to call upon I&J to take this a step further by ensuring that maybe the operational standards we've discussed are documented into a report. Just like we now have this global status report, I propose that in the next meeting, we adopt another report documenting these operational norms and standards such that we can have evidence-based recommendations about how internet can be best managed. Many of us, we advise governments, but sometimes not everybody is knowledgeable enough about this subject. And many times as an advisor, you can be limited if you give your opinion without showing evidence of what you're saying. But where you have a report by a global, credible institution like I&J, then you get reason to advise whoever you're advising that the route you're taking is not good. There is a better route, and it has been tested by so many other seasoned and experienced people. So I call upon I&J and the entire team to continue bringing people together, and indeed to also add that we need parliamentarians to join this platform, because they are the people that make laws, they are the people that make policies that all of us end up grappling with as the technical people. So I think we need now to focus on approaching parliamentarians across the globe, but also, like another colleague mentioned, we need to bring on board other operators. Myself from Africa, I note that we have very few from Africa here, and I'm happy that indeed there is an attempt to take this discussion to Addis Ababa. You are welcome to Kampala. We can partner with I&J and bring the discussion closer to the people, like in East Africa, so we can discuss digital rights. How can we better manage the internet without losing the dividends that we're already reaping as a country, as a world? So thank you very much for bringing us all here, and we look forward to more interventions, more engagement that can make the world better positioned to benefit from the internet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those remarks. Anybody else who would like to take the floor before I continue? If that is not the case, I would now like to give the floor to ANRIETTE ESTERHUYSEN, who's the Director of Policy of the Association of Progressive Communications and a member of our advisory group and a member of the Content and Jurisdiction Program. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Paul and Bertrand, and to your team. I come from South Africa. Pablo Bello said earlier he's from the most unequal region in the world. I'm from currently the most unequal country in the world, South Africa. 4 points. Firstly, interoperability. Interoperability is a technical term. I know Bertrand likes to develop technical solutions for policy problems. Without it, we wouldn't have the internet. But striving for interoperability between actors and norms is worthy, but not easy. People, their values, principles, laws, and procedures are complex and diverse. Moreover, human beings and the institutions they create are well known for not always acting in their own best interest, never mind the interest of others. This leads me to the second point. If there's one area where the basis of interoperability between norms and actors is already strong, it's in the field of human rights. There's an elaborate and growing body of research, soft law, binding treaties, resolutions, and case law that exists to guide and support the work of the content group. While there's clear recognition already in this group of the importance at a general level of human rights, there seems still to be an element of tension and uncertainty, maybe even an ambivalence about exactly how to deal with this. There's a common assumption that governments just don't care, or many governments just don't care about international human rights treaties they've signed on to. In my experience, reality is actually much more nuanced and complex than that. In fact, they often do care, perhaps not just in the way you expect them to care. I believe the trick is in facing the devil that resides in the detail of specific types of content removal questions and requests. Exploring what the body of international human rights law and practice can offer or not offer when applied to specific cases, I think should be the way forward for the group in how to address this problem, which others have also raised. Thirdly, I agree with Maria Paz and others who've mentioned prioritization. It's necessary because there's just so much happening. It could be done based on the frequency of requests. For example, copyright or trademark related requests, which is many are around that. It could be based on urgency, such as the concern with violent and extremist content, which is currently being addressed by the Christchurch Paul, or on the practice of governments using community standards of companies for takedown requests. But there are different ways of doing that. Finally, I want to just remind us that the goal of this process is to develop commonly understood and respected operational solutions. It's not to find shortcuts. And this includes not finding shortcuts around the rule of law or the duties and responsibilities to respect and promote rights. As the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network embarks on this phase of extensive regional outreach, I think this should be front and center. Finding a clear path through the thorny forest of coherence and contradiction between national and international approaches to freedom of expression and information will be much easier if guided by existing international human rights law and standards. Thanks.
Thank you very much for those words. I look into the plenary if there are other interventions of people who also want to share their point of view. Please, the microphone again over there for the gentleman.
Hi, Greg Nojheim, CDT. I'd like to float an idea about how to engage and satiate the appetite that all the constituencies have expressed for engagement with some of the ongoing processes. One way to do it would be for the Secretariat to take the materials that have already been produced and take them into the various sessions. But another way to do it that might be more effective would be to set up engagement committees that are representative of each of the stakeholder groups, and there'd be one committee in each track, and that committee would be instructed by the members of the track on what to say in the particular engagement. The members of the track could identify the engagements that ought to be prioritized for this committee. I'm just floating an idea. I think that there's a lot of energy in the room to do this kind of engagement, and I think to do it this way would make it, would draw on the value of the multi-stakeholderism that you've put together in this room. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very important suggestion that also resonates with the calls of stakeholders in all three meetings of the three programs yesterday, of the question of how to promote the achievement of the operational approaches documents with their proposals for norms, criteria, and mechanisms. Thank you very much. With that, I would now like to give the floor to Mauricio PAZINI BRANDAO, who's the Secretary for Applied Technologies of the Brazilian Ministry of Science, Technology, Innovations and Communication. Please, you have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you, Bertrand and Paul, for the invitation. Brazil is represented in this conference by a dozen people. Half of them are members of the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee, CGI. The rest represents the Federal Prosecutor's Office, the Government, Foreign Relations and Science, Technology, Innovations and Communication Ministries, as well as private law and consulting companies. Brazil has a model for Internet governance established by guidelines as universal access to information and knowledge, and promotion for people participation. This model has yielded a more effective electronic government, interoperability, transparency, and digital education. To reinforce this governance model is of utmost importance to keep learning about the status and trends of data, content, and domains jurisdictions. Brazil has a projected market of 300 million people spread over 8.5 million square kilometers. Today, about 68% of all houses are connected to internet. Launched 2 years ago, the Brazilian Defense and Strategic Communications Satellite plays a major role in the modernization of our internet infrastructure. Brazil's internet forecast is led by inclusion. It starts by taking science and technology to the schools by means of a partnership between the Ministries of Education, Science, Technology, Innovations, and Communications, and continues by creating infrastructure to provide internet wideband connections to people located in remote places. In the first 5 months of this year, we have installed more than 5,000 new connections out of a total capability of 300,000. These numbers show that we are only at the beginning. We are all facing new challenges ahead, and we should be prepared for them, regarding them with the global eyes of this conference's tripod: data, content, and domains. We have to be prepared for whatever new governance issues, innovations created by AI technologies, 5G, agriculture, education, industry, and sustainability 4.0 will bring to us. The participation in this conference will help us improve our policies and strategies, as well as redesign our plans and budgets to better serve the Brazilian people within this global context. Thanks for the opportunity to share our concerns and to learn from your experiences.
Thank you very much. I would now like to give the floor to Jordan Carter, who's the Chief Executive of InternetNZ and a member of the Domains and Jurisdiction Program. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Paul, and good morning, almost afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the chance to make an intervention here today, and thanks to you, Paul and Bertrand, and the whole INJ Secretariat for the work that's gone into this project so far. I wanted to offer a couple of thoughts as a CCTLD manager in this debate, not representing that enormously diverse community, but just a few thoughts, and a couple of reflections about why this process is so important. And I am a member of the Domain and Jurisdiction group, but this event I spent in the content one following the terrorist attacks on the Muslim communities of Christchurch, New Zealand in March. I'll come back to that Christchurch call follow-up at the end of my points. About 45% of the domain names in the world are from country code names, not from the big global generic names. In the CCTLD community, that's the acronym, we do not have a common global policy framework. We do not have a common institution that binds us to policies. We're all deeply embedded in our very different national, legal, and policy communities. And most of us are very small organizations. That diversity is a huge strength because it means that we serve our local communities in ways that we could not do with a global framework. But it does make it difficult to envisage a globally harmonized approach to dealing with the difficult issues that are in front of the project. And so I just want to say that to make sure that people remember that fact. You know, there's things that fit big global registries might not work. The simplicity of us dealing with an email response in .nz is different to the need for a big datagram to deal with thousands and thousands of notices on the global level. So making sure that the work we do is fit for purpose, I think, is something that we need to keep in mind. The second point is just a reflection on the importance of this work. A lot of the global multi-stakeholder internet policy debate, it never leads to outcomes. It discusses issues. And the unique opportunity of this is to take a narrow, well-defined set of issues and to come up with both policy and operational approaches that can work. But we need to get to the working bit. And so I want to endorse previous calls about pace and previous calls about the need to start experimenting, start pilot programs, start moving from documents to action in the real world. And that isn't something that the Secretariat can make us do. It's something that we can all do and get on with. And within the confines of the program and the timetable for next year, we have to build in that space for action. And as an example of that, the Christchurch call that was agreed by major tech companies and some governments in Paris in May, that went from inception to agreement in 6 weeks. The first conference of this network happened in November 2016. I just leave you to reflect on the time frame difference. Action can come quickly. The longer we take to get there, the more likely it is that governments will do things quickly and unexpectedly. So for the wisdom of our group to be best applied, it needs to be being applied as soon as possible. Thanks again, that's all I've got.
Thank you very much for those remarks. Before we now go to the closing session, there's a last opportunity for the plenary for someone to take the floor. Yes, please, over there.
Alison Gilwald, Research ICT Africa and the University of Cape Town, South Africa. I really wanted to welcome the interventions around the meetings that are planning to take place in Addis Ababa and in Latin America. And I'm not familiar with the complexities of setting these meetings up, and I'm sure they're done long in advance of the time that they're being held. But instead of treating the incorporation of the Global South as a kind of, adding on and getting people involved, I was wondering, as a kind of real commitment to this, whether we could commit at the next 2-year meeting or the next meeting after that to actually hold this meeting in the Global South, possibly with one of the governments that have already demonstrated a commitment to this process, although we can always muster up some commitment from some others, if necessary. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for this remark. It is an ambition that the Secretariat wholeheartedly also has. This would be amazing if that could work. We're doing our best. Bertrand?
Just to finish and wrap up, this one, a few remarks that came from the comments that were made. The first one is I think the proposal that Greg raised on engagement teams is a very interesting one, and as a matter of fact, it is a dimension of the reasons why we called the contact groups, because they are not representatives that are delegated by the different constituencies. There are people who act as interface between their own groups and constituencies and the work that is being done here. But what you highlight is that there is an interest potentially in distinguishing the two functions, and particularly have a focus on how to leverage the people who are in to discuss together what the engagement is towards the rest, what is the communication strategy, what type of documents and deliverables can be produced. Jordan had to leave, but the case of the CCTLD community, the country code top-level domains, is a very interesting illustration of the challenge of having things that are sufficiently shared in terms of criteria for interoperability, while preserving the diversity of the national anchoring of an operator. If you look at it technically, every CCTLD does fundamentally the same function. The reality is that each of them, more than global top-level domains, generic top-level domains, are under the respective legislative or legal systems of their countries, and that has considerable influences on the way they operate, and at the same time they are a constituent part, even a fundamental part, as RINALIA mentioned, of the infrastructure that makes the whole global interoperable system run. And so rather than being a sort of appendix to the discussion on the domains track, the combination and the presence in the process of both generic top-level domains, CCTLDs and other operators is an important component because it's an illustration of diversity. And to finish on maybe a joke, following on what RINALIA was saying and what many comments have raised, the months ahead are a moment to intervene when things are being discussed, not after the legislations have been adopted. That's the moment. And the thing is that there's a saying that you don't do an omelette with hard-boiled eggs. If you want to do something, you don't wait until the things are completely set, because then interoperability is harder. And that's exactly the challenge that is ahead of us.